The mid-season moves continue as Toronto FC have traded Mark-Anthony Kaye to the New England Revolution in exchange for Latif Blessing and a 2023 international roster spot. The post-Bob Bradley rostered moves continue. Out goes Mark-Anthony Kaye, who has been a controversial figure for Toronto FC this season. He was brought in last season in a trade which involved over $1 million in allocation money and Ralph Priso being sent out to bring the Canadian international midfielder in. And in a year at Toronto FC, Mark-Anthony Kaye's stock dropped. He went from being a sometimes starter for the Canadian national team who went to the World Cup in Qatar to not even making the rotated Gold Cup lineup. Honestly, the fall of Mark-Anthony Kaye since he joined Toronto FC is shocking. He was such a solid midfielder for LAFC and for the Canadian national team. Like 2021, early 2022, Mark-Anthony Kaye was just a solid midfielder. And his first game for Toronto FC, he looked really good. Like, he was fantastic in his first game for Toronto FC. Then he had an injury, and then he never really got up to the level that he was at when he first came to TFC after that injury happened, and then he's had a couple more injuries on and off. He's kind of fallen off as the team itself as a whole has fallen off, and just overall, Mark-Anthony Kaye's time in Toronto FC has been a bit of a disaster. There's no real bright spots from his time in Toronto. And as a guy who is purely a Bob Bradley guy all around, as the team tries to separate itself from the disaster that was the Bob Bradley era, Mark-Anthony Kaye goes. It's just interesting that to get out of the Bob Bradley era, we trade away a 28-year-old midfielder who got his chance to be a starter in MLS under Bob Bradley's 2018 LAFC for a 26-year-old midfielder slash winger who got his real start to be a star in MLS in 2018 Bob Bradley's LAFC. Latif Blessing is the guy we bring in. Latif Blessing is a Bob Bradley guy. Latif Blessing was on the radar to join Toronto FC in the winter when he was leaving LAFC, and people thought, oh, he's going to go back and join Bob Bradley because he played very well under Bob Bradley at LAFC. And then he went and joined the New England Revolution, but Latif Blessing was kind of always on the periphery of a Bob Bradley guy that Bob Bradley could end up bringing into Toronto FC. And now that Bob Bradley is gone, why is the first move we're making, besides the Ibarra loan, bringing in a Bob Bradley guy? That just doesn't make sense. Mark-Anthony Kaye, not great. Has not been good for Toronto FC. He's not lived up to expectations. Latif Blessing, okay, well, he's a midfield slash winger. We don't really need him at the wing because the Italians are already underperforming there, and the Italians aren't going to like not starting over him. He's not a striker, so that doesn't fix that issue. Yes, he's midfield depth then. Latif Blessing is a fine player. He has taken a bit of a step down in recent years. Like Mark-Anthony Kaye, he peaked in 2020-2021 under Bob Bradley for LAFC. And like Mark-Anthony Kaye, he's another guy who hasn't really lived up to expectations since Bob Bradley left LAFC, and now this move is basically trading two very similar career trajectory players for each other. I'm just concerned as why is this move happening right now? Because why is Latif Blessing, who by all means is a Bob Bradley guy, being brought in the post-Bob Bradley era? Like, I knew that Bob Bradley getting moved out right before the transfer window opened was going to have some issues happen when the transfer window started, because basically Jason Hernandez is left to do all the work when he wasn't expected to have to do the work this transfer window. And also the fact that Jason Hernandez was an internal guy means that the Bob Bradley notes might have been left over. Mark-Anthony Kaye going out for Latif Blessing was probably not the original plan, but I guarantee you Latif Blessing coming in is notes left over from the Bob Bradley era, which, take that how you will. I mean, Latif Blessing could be a far better player here than Mark-Anthony Kaye was, but removing a Bob Bradley guy to bring in another Bob Bradley guy is not confidence inspiring. Now, the other interesting part of this move is the fact that we do get an international roster spot for 2023. That's weird because, first off, Latif Blessing, like Ibarra, despite not being American, both have US green cards, which means that they count as domestic players for MLS purposes. I know it's so weird that a US green card when you're playing in Canada makes you a domestic player, but whatever. So neither of them take up international roster spots. Toronto FC, as we all know right now, is up to our limit for the season with international roster spots. We have 6 plus Victor Vazquez taking up an extra one because he's been at the club for over a year. So if we want to bring in any other international players and not move out any international players we currently have, we would need another international roster spot. So why would we bring in an international roster spot just for the remainder of this season if we weren't going to do that? So obviously, another move with an international player coming into Toronto FC is on the horizon. That is the only thing that us bringing in that international roster spot could mean, and it also means that don't expect any of the current international players to get shipped out because we have an empty international roster spot sitting there open for the remainder of the season. So one international player definitely is going to be coming in soon. That's the only reason why you get that thrown in for the rest of the year. So we dump one Bob Bradley midfielder, bring in another Bob Bradley midfielder, and get an international roster spot for it. Now, I think like for both Blessing and Mark-Anthony Kaye, a change of scenery was needed. Is Toronto FC right now the change of scenery that's going to inspire a player to turn their form back to like the best stage of their career? I'm not sure. Like, again, we're at the stage of Toronto FC where like any player that's coming in, I'm like they could be good, but this isn't the environment for them to be good in. Like Latif Blessing is a good player. I like Latif Blessing as a player. Is Latif Blessing coming into 2023 Toronto FC right now a recipe for success for Latif Blessing? Probably not. But obviously this team is broken right now. Things have to change. At 26 years old, Latif Blessing is a guy who you keep him around for the future. Like Latif Blessing is a very solid player in MLS. Latif Blessing is a player who like for the future for Toronto FC could be very useful next season if we build a better team. So I like that move for that. Mark-Anthony Kaye, he was not working. Like he had fallen off a cliff in terms of where his standing was even in the national team system for Canada with his time in Toronto. So just even for like the Canadian national team going forward, it's good to get Mark-Anthony Kaye out of Toronto. For Toronto FC, it's probably good to get Mark-Anthony Kaye out of Toronto. For Mark-Anthony Kaye, it's probably good to get Mark-Anthony Kaye out of Toronto. So let's just look at this as Mark-Anthony Kaye tried Toronto for a year. It didn't work out for him. He's moved on. We get a new guy in who could potentially be useful, could potentially have the same thing fall apart, and we have the international roster spot, which we know is going to be used to bring in an international player soon. There you go, all nice and dandy, wrapped up in a little bow. The season still doesn't matter, that's that. So that is for this video. As always, if you'd like to hit like, if you want to see more of my stuff, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, link is down below in the description, and I will see you next time.